Betty is the former chief negotiator in the conflict between the government of Uganda and the large resistance army. No easy challenge to take on, I think we can all understand. She's currently Uganda's Minister of Water and Environment. No, she's the Minister of Water in the Ministry of Water and Environment, right? There I got it precisely right. You are also somebody who has been visiting PRIO more than once over the past few years. It's always a great honor to have you here. My name is Christian Berg Harpviken. I'm the director of PRIO, the Peace Research Institute Oslo. And for us at PRIO, the role of women in peace processes, the fate of women in war, the importance of a gender perspective when you study war and conflict is something that's always been central to the peace research agenda. Today, these issues are more central than ever. We have a research group that takes UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in many ways that's its point of departure and engages with issues that has first and foremost to do with the implementation of that resolution, which as we know is now quite a few years old, but where there are still challenges that needs to be tackled. I'm also proud to see that at PRIO, in our larger research portfolio, we have increasingly integrated a research perspective in virtually all topics that it is that we work on. Currently, when it comes to engagements that has particularly to do with gender, we are doing a lot of work on the maternal health implications of armed conflict. Sounds simple, but is difficult, and certainly, as I'm sure all of you understand, is important. We do quite a bit of work on gender-based violence, on mapping gender-based violence, but also on the reconstitution and the recovery of the victims of sexual violence. We work on sexual violence also in the context of peacekeeping. We do a lot of work, and we'll return to this in the context of today's seminar, on the political participation of women, both broadly spoken, global patterns, but also with a focus on particular countries. And I'd like to mention Colombia, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and also South Asia at large, as samples from that work. More particularly, we also work on the involvement and impact of women of Islamic charity, both locally in Pakistan and transnationally across the globe and between Norway and Pakistan. And Betty, when we last met, which was in October, it was at a high-level seminar on gender and inclusive mediation processes that PRIO is co-hosting with the Crisis Management Initiative and the Department of Political Affairs. We met in the forests outside Helsinki. I enjoyed listening to you then. I'll certainly enjoy listening to you again today. This collaboration on training of high-level mediators is really a kind of a flagship in PRIO's gender portfolio. It is really founded in not only solid research, but equally important, the unique experience of people like yourself, people who have had their hands dirty with the difficult work of dealing with governments and warlords, if I may use that expression, bringing them to the table, and not only bringing them to the table, but actually ensuring that the role of men and women alike is heard, and that issues that has to do with the gender equity and gender differences are thoroughly represented both in the negotiations and in the outcome of the negotiations. So we really see this project as kind of a model of what it is that we aspire to do when we bring our knowledge into the world of those who do the practical work, because I have to admit, we do less of the practical work much as I would allow to being a reschooled farmer. We are mainly doing the thinking, but to do that thinking constructively, we need to do that in dialogue with people like yourself. So again, Betty, it's a real pleasure to have you at PRIO. We regard you as a close friend, and this house is always open to you. You're always welcome. We always learn from your visits, and we look forward also to learn from today's visit. I'll now hand the floor over to Torunn Tryggestad here. Torunn is one of the driving engines of PRIO's research on gender. She also heads the PRIO research group on gender, has been doing this for not leading the research group, but certainly working on the issues for a couple of decades now. And is very well placed to take us through today's event. So please, Torunn.
Thank you, Christian. Yes, as Christian already alluded to, we have a very vibrant research community or research group here at PRIO looking at various aspects of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And that was also the background for why this Gender, Conflict and Peacebuilding project was established back in 2006. And this seminar is one of the activities coming out of that project. When we started out, the mandate of the project was to build research capacity on the various issues relating to the Women, Peace and Security agenda and the implementation of Resolution 1325. And there are many dimensions to this resolution, but the core message in the resolution is women's participation in every aspect that has to do with international peace and security, how to manage conflict, how to prevent conflict, peace mediation. And as regards the latter, I think that that's the part of this agenda that has been the most neglected. There are so few women involved in peace mediation processes in general, but particularly so when it comes to actually being the lead mediator. So Betty Bigombe, you are really a rare species. You are one of the very few. And there are many assumptions about bringing more women into peace processes. One being that they will bring something different, something new, that peace will be more sustainable. We don't really know this because there isn't much research on these issues around. And another thing that is also assumed is that if you bring women in, they will immediately also cover and be concerned about securing women's human rights. And I was lucky to listen to you in Helsinki last November, was it? Yeah. And you shared some very interesting perspectives on these issues. So that was why I was eager to invite you here to PRIO to share some of your reflections about how you came into the business of peace mediation in the conflict in your own country, and to what extent you have reflected on your own role as a woman. Did you bring something different? Were you perceived differently? What were your own major concerns when you got involved? So Betty will talk on these issues. We set aside approximately 45 minutes. She says that she thinks that's a little bit too long perhaps, or she would like it to be a more interactive session. So she will speak for a while, then we can open up for questions and discussions, and she will continue. She would like it to be interactive.
Yes.
So Betty, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me here this morning. And I would like to welcome all of you who've taken time off your busy schedule to come and listen to what I have to say. But I must also caution you that there's absolutely nothing special that you've heard or seen before. I would also want to let you know that I have not prepared any PowerPoints. I'll be talking about my experience. And what I was saying the other day at the training workshop is that sometimes I behave like what you call in Uganda, BBC, born before computer. So I don't use it all the time. I would sometimes prefer to talk off the top, basically when it's my experience. I don't want to be confined to PowerPoint. I want to stray off and talk about the issues that I think could be of importance, issues that I think could be lessons learned in the process. It is also important to let you know that when I became the mediator between the Lord's Resistance Army and the government of Uganda, I had never gone to school, and I've never gone to school, so to learn to mediate. So mine was purely learning by doing, and of course there were major omissions, there were mistakes, there are a number of things that could have been done differently, and probably made the process to bring it to the international standard. A couple of weeks ago, I was at the African Center for Mediation in Pretoria, South Africa. And one of the questions that I was asked was, who appointed you to be the mediator? Because usually you have to have mandate from somebody. Yeah. More importantly, the parties. The parties have to, and of course, these days a lot of it is the UN, regional organizations, the case of South Sudan, IGAD. IGAD is Intergovernmental Agency for Development that mediated between North and South Sudan and is now mediating the conflict in South Sudan. So, or African Union would appoint you. And the parties really do not have much choice. They will always accept based on the fact that it's a regional organization, and therefore our interests are taken care of. Because for the parties, the mediator must be mindful about their concerns, must protect their interest. So when I was asked who appointed me, I said, I didn't even think about being appointed. I just decided I'm going to do it. So the question was I at there were two mediations between the Lord's Resistance Army and Uganda government. One was in the 90s, the first initiative. And the second one was 2004, when I went back and initiated another round of mediation. So why would the Lord's Resistance Army, at that time I was in government, why would they accept me to mediate? Why would they believe that I would care about their concerns or their interest? And in particular, given what the atrocities they were committing, why did they feel I could protect them or at least be fair? I think in their mind was I was government trusted by the president and therefore could deliver on them. On the part of the government, mediation was never on the radar screen. It was just, we're going to fight and we're going to win this war militarily. And then there will be peace. But out of conviction that, military victory never brings sustainable peace because it doesn't give people opportunity to address the underlying causes of the problem. So it took persuading government to say, yes, the first time you might win militarily. The Lord's Resistance Army is a crazy rebel organization that commits terrible atrocities. But at the same time, the people of northern Uganda had issues, and that is why they were being supported. They felt they were marginalized. There were a horde of issues so crazy as they were, it would give us opportunity to address some of these underlying causes of the problems. So, and having dealt with the issues, because I started in 1988, and this was 1992, that I finally made contact and brought the Lord's Resistance Army to agree to a negotiated settlement. I had been with the conflict all the time, and I had found this avenue. But let me go back to what the issue was about being a woman. Of course, when I moved to live in the conflict zone, there were very many mixed reactions. At that time, there were about 5 factions fighting government. So I received all these letters of threat from the rebels. We feel terribly insulted that a woman should be involved in the war. This is a male domain, and get out of here. If you don't, we will get you, we'll come for you. The community, government is not serious about ending this war. How dare government send a woman to handle this? Not to mention that the president, I was a girlfriend, and he wanted an area where, nobody could go to, because we would go to a war zone. So he could sneak in and sleep with me. There were those who were sympathetic with me, who said, why don't you just leave the country? Museveni wants you killed. How could he send you to the war zone? So there was a lot of mixed reactions. There were those who said, don't worry, if she lasts a month here with all these deaths and destructions, then you will see she will just run away and not be here. So were all these very mixed reactions. Nothing was positive. But on my side too, when I started working, I was calling meetings, I was going into IDP camps to sit with people. One strategy that I developed was listen. And a mediator has to be a good listener for hours. Sometimes they repeat themselves, but don't shut them up. It's one way of venting. It's one way of identifying entry point in how can they work with you to solve the problem. So meetings, town hall meetings, meetings in camps, meetings everywhere on trying to solve the conflict. The strategy why I decided to go to the community and stay with them was, these were the very people whose sons had been manipulated to pick up arms and fight. It is not the big warlords who send their children overseas, go to school. So, and I totally ignored women. And it was only at one, because I didn't think, my perception too was, I'll talk to those who are carrying weapons. Why would I waste my time talking to women who are in camps looking after the sick, supplementing humanitarian assistance? To me, they didn't matter at all. Until one brave, courageous woman one day in a meeting said, you're going to fail. You're going to fail because you're only engaging men. You're not talking to us women. We're the mothers of those fighters. We're the wives of those fighters. And not only that, when you send us on a mission, we talk from our hearts. We are sincere about these deaths. We want it to stop. We're not benefiting like other people benefit from wars. And when men you will sit with them, they will tell you all the right things, but none of them will implement what is agreed upon. Lo and behold, she was so right. Because at some point when I tried to reach out, the rebels, it was letters. That was after I'd negotiated with Ugandan Parliament to give blanket amnesty, and which was passed by Act of Parliament. Then I signed letters. And it was the mothers, the wives, the sisters who ventured out to deliver my messages to the women. Not only that, that really woke me up that, yes, I was saying that, you know, I had all these men would come with brilliant ideas. They knew what was going on and talked the right language. Not only that, eventually I did realize that why don't I use these women to have massive demonstration against the war so that the message should go. My target was not just to the rebels, but I'm also talking to Ugandan government troops who totally believed the war should be ended by military means. So, and this demonstration was widely covered by the media, not just local, but also international, that people realized that, then I did realize there was seriousness on what was going on. That, I mean, we talk about women being victims. Yes, to some extent, they get blown up by landmines. We get raped. We suffer all kinds of consequences of war. But at the same time, women are doers. They get up and go and do what has been agreed upon. So from ignoring women, I did realize the importance that women play in the actual mediation. So even when I finally identified rebel code collaborators or coordinators, if you will, because all these people always have their constituencies. You have suppliers of weapons. You have the good fathers who will keep on saying, go on fighting. You need to find out who are these people whose interest is to keep a war going. And through sitting in the night in camps from one to the other, you know, somebody will whisper to you, did you see that person who was talking, peering like he was possessed? That's a rebel coordinator. And so the next mission is, how can I reach that person through you, to bring peace? And that was a breakthrough through involving women to even take letters, my personal letters, to the rebels, to start, to continue with, you know, to start talking to one another. So what about at the table? I've just been to South Sudan, and one of the issues was, I was there earlier, and at that time, South Sudan had not allowed, the government had not, the opposition side had women on their negotiating team, but government did not. So it was, how can we persuade government to make sure that women get involved in there? So I went in to talk to some women parliamentarians, civil society, and see, how can we make sure that women actually do participate at the table? When in my own situation, again, the question is, what kind of women? Because we involve women, yes. Now it's almost, there's consensus, yes, women must be involved. But what kind of women? Oftentimes, we still take note takers. We'll sit at the back and take all the notes. They are statistics that, oh yes, we also have women on our part. But what effective contribution can they make? So with the South Sudan, my argument with the government was, you know, although we've not quite, we do not have really, there's been this argument that peace agreements that have been signed have failed because of lack of inclusion of women in the process. This has not been fully substantiated. The argument being made at the moment is, well, you know, when it comes to implementation, usually women are instrumental, but because they're left out, so they cannot get involved only in implementation. There's also the argument that if you have women will talk about social issues that concern them. Or say, we need education, we need this. Uniformed people or men will talk about positions. How many positions are you going to give us? You know, power sharing. What are you going to give me to benefit as a person in the process or on our side? So we've not quite been able to substantiate that. But my argument was, if you have 60% of your population, because the population of South Sudan, women are 60%. How can you have 60% of your population left out of the process? There's this demographic power that we need to use. And more in most countries, at least I can say for Africa, I do not know about Europe. There are now more women than men. So how do you leave out a huge section of your population from this very, very important process? Not only that, your constitution clearly stipulates that on every forum, every issue, 30%, the composition of your delegation as a government, 30% must be women. How come then it comes to this representation? You think women, you know, they're emotional, leave them out, and you decide to leave them, you know, not to be there. But anyway, eventually, the government did agree to send women and 30% of the composition of their delegates to the peace talks. Emotions, yes, we can be very emotional, but this emotion, I go back to my own experience. It came into a time. I have to tell you this. My first meeting with this warlord was, you know, he actually exists. The next question is, if only I could open up his brain and try to understand why he does what he does the way he does it. This is a man who orders that a baby plucks out of the mother's back, his head should be bashed on a tree. This is a man who believes in amputation of, you know, lips, noses, ears, men's parts. This is a man who slits people's stomach wide open, sometimes pregnant women. So I just want to understand, there is this anger within yourself that you try to set on and not let it overcome your intention of ending what was going on. So through talking and sitting and trying to also understand him, that eventually he started calling me mother. Now, somebody calls you mother, what does that mean? That you can protect him, you're not going to betray him, you're not, you know, typical role of a mother. So that was a very important step when they all started calling me mother, because then I became a symbol of a mother to them. I became the symbol a protector, a giver for their welfare, somebody who would do whatever it takes to give this protection. So that was important, because even when it came to the actual talks, there were things that obviously, mediation is not easy, it's very stressful. Somebody is trying to justify why they killed innocent people. Somebody is trying to justify why they abducted young girls, raped them, got them pregnant. Just is trying to justify the abduction of young boys and turning them into killing machines. And you want to say, don't you understand, bang the table, so that they can understand that what they did was wrong. But I also am convinced that even with a lot of frustrations and anger, women have the ability to sometimes sit on their frustrations, anger, so that it does not overcome them. We've just been doing some simulation of mediation in this training workshop. And the stress of it, and how people walked away, and how then the girls come, and I've seen this in real life. Girls will come around and say, well, you know, let's find another way. Let's find another approach, as opposed to just abandoning the process because the conditions that we've given has not been bought by the other side. Abandonment is not a solution to the problem. Yes, it's a way of communicating your frustrations and what you are terribly opposed to. But let's retreat and try to find another approach to the problem. And then I was seeing this yesterday happening. And this is exactly what I've seen in other peace talks, that men will start exchanging words, they'll show their anger and all that, and then the mediator will say, okay, let's retreat, regroup. And you move in and you'll find in the corridors, women are begging them to go back to the table. I think you saw what happened in Liberia, where women camped on the corridors and said, you're not getting out of here until you reach an agreement. So those were observers, but within them, who eventually appeals to those were the hardliners, who is just trying to prove that this is our position, we can go back to fighting. I don't care. To a woman, we'll go back to fighting. How many more people will we lose? How many, the kind of destruction? How much more can we take of this destruction? Let's not abandon this opportunity. Let's see how we can find another approach, way of mediating, so that it can be a win-win situation. We may not be able to walk away with 100% of what we desire, but we may be able to walk away with some percentage that can appease our people, but at the same time also end the suffering of the people. So you have the role that women play even within their own negotiation teams to change the way of thinking, the way of looking at things. So I will now jump onto something else, because my frustrations over the years, you know, I was coming here fairly regularly for senior mediators retreat. And each time at the end of the senior mediators retreat, of course there's the issue of women, you know, women mediators. And I don't know how many times we were asked to submit names, recommend names of women who could, you know, lead mediation, at least be deputy. I challenged the former Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, Kofi Annan talks very well about women's involvement, but full participation. But look at his team. Always not takers, doing administration, running around, whereby he just has not done by example to bring women to take the lead in peace talks. Oh, well, women are not there. Where did you look? Did you ask? Did you search? Did you consult to be able to identify women who could lead in the mediation process? We still, but it's true we've gone a long way. You now have many more women. The topic is being discussed again and again at different forums on the inclusion of women. But it's still very much at the discussion level. It's still very much at the talk. So the question is, do women bring something different to the peace talks? Again, let me go back to the question of South Sudan. When they say, well, you know, you take them there, they will be very emotional. But this emotion sometimes helps to get people to think more objectively than just pursue their own interest. And I even remember the women that were taken to Addis Ababa who were able to address both parties. And you could see that they talked from their hearts. They were, you know, talking of, we were born in war, raised in war, we saw so and so die. We've now tested peace. We don't want our children to go through what we've gone through. And I could see the men, I mean, most of them looking down because the message was so strong. But so what is wrong with emotions around the table? If it can open up the hearts and minds of the negotiators to be more realistic rather than think of just the big picture, this is what we want, this is our position regarding A, B, C, D, E. What's wrong with bringing in emotions that can open up the hearts and minds of the negotiators so that they can be more objective in the entire process? Then also it comes to the question of whether, in my own experience, I considered gender issues and women's rights and concerns as important to negotiations. Oh, absolutely, yes. There was the question of, which is very prevalent in Africa. I must say that rape in African culture is never condemned. It's always there. It's just that we don't talk about it very much. But it's aggravated in war times. And consequently, it's become, you know, a weapon of war to humiliate, to dominate, and just to make the other side feel absolutely rotten. So how, especially when you're working on the agenda for the peace talks, especially on ceasefire agreements, the issue of gender must be included right at that point in time. When you leave it out, that is, oh, it's going to be on the agenda, when the actual negotiation starts, then you have lost it. So when sexual violence is rampant, you know, I've been to East Congo a couple of times, and it's emotionally draining. the prevalent rape of women. A long time ago, even the peacekeepers were raping women. But I must give credit to the UN because that has stopped. But even with the peacekeepers in East Congo, in the evenings they withdraw and go into the barracks. They're not moving around to monitor what is going on. So, and women once again become very vulnerable. It might not necessarily be the fight, the militias. It's just like in the Congo, when the police were also on a rampant, the justification was they hadn't been paid for 9 months, their salary. So do you unleash it on these poor, innocent women? And let me back up a bit. What was also very frustrating when the peacekeepers were raping women was the UN came and said, no, we cannot punish them. We have no mandate. It's not included in the terms of reference. So we leave it to the contributing country to do something about it. What about the host country? Oh, we don't have the means to punish. We cannot even investigate. We don't have the capacity to investigate. Not only that, in the relationship, the memorandum of understanding, this is not included. So where do we start from? So it's left to the contributing country. Of course, the contributing country is not going to punish their own soldiers. First of all, contributing countries make money out of peacekeepers. So are you going to destroy the image of your peacekeepers that they're rapists? Of course not. Sit on it. So it's non-issue. It's not important. So, but fortunately, as far as peacekeepers are concerned, this is now contained. It's no longer an issue, although we still have reported cases where you have AU peacekeepers where they will come and tell you, oh, it was with consent, it wasn't really rape, because these women, of course, go around barracks because they're looking for some supplement to their, they're looking for money. The young girls are looking for money. So they say it is consent, but that is not an area to go to. So my concern then at the outset was, yes, women issues have to be included in the ceasefire agreement so that when it gets to the implementation of the ceasefire agreement, sexual violence is taken into consideration. Any form of violation of women is included in the, the monitoring and verification team can include that as one of the areas that they need to look into during ceasefire when the talks are ongoing. In some cases, some mediators believe this should come during the actual mediation. And I totally refuse that. And if you are involved in any negotiation or mediation, make sure this comes up front. Then it gets the due attention. Then it's taken seriously and not marginalized or brought just at the end of the agenda. I think for the time being,
yes, we should open up for,
for
questions and comments.
And then I can continue based on the areas that you would like me to, to throw some more light on.
Yes, sure.
Is, in the United States, I could say that 33% of the female population has been raped in some areas, and of that 33%, a large majority of them are raped more than once in their lifetime. So if you have a country with a baseline that's even higher than that as the utgangspunkt, as the starting point, and then you include the monitoring of rape by a rebel force or by the government as a condition of war, as a violation of the peace agreement, right? So that rape is included in the peace agreement. It must present some complications when then that rape continues. First, in defining whether or not the rapes are associated within the conflict, because the baseline in the country is already so high from before. And also, if that doesn't cause a problem in the negotiation process, if there are no consequences of those rapes, then rape will not be legitimized, or do you understand what I'm saying? Like, that if the people mediating the process say, okay, there's been a break in this mediation process because now all these rapes are occurring, and it's just like taking up arms again. If nobody recognizes that, then sexual violence is not validated in that context. It's, again, pushed under the rug. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Would you respond to that immediately?
No, let's take a couple of questions.
Inge?
Yeah, my name is Inge Kjellsbeck, and I'm also a researcher here at CREO. Thank you for a great presentation and for sharing your views and perceptions. And I have one question which is perhaps a dilemma, and I would want to hear your comment on this, because you started saying that you had that you weren't trained to be a peace mediator, and I think that goes probably for a lot of people who are in that position. And yet, in the work that we do here at CREO, involved with the CMI Institute in Finland, we're trying in a way to train, to make this generic knowledge, if you like, how to do peace mediation and thereby include women. So to what extent is peace mediation sort of a generic thing, something that can be taught, and something that requires particular knowledge, experience, and being perceived in particular ways in the conflict setting? How would you assess those two, let's say, starting points for getting engaged in peace mediation? So that was one question. If I could take one more, because I was interested in what you said about how you were called a mother. I thought that was very, very interesting. And I would be curious also to know how you sort of assessed getting that label, and how you use that as a strength, obviously, in your story, rather than seeing that as a way of diminishing your role. So if you could reflect a little bit, if that could be, that could be a perception, and what your thoughts are around that. Thank you.
That was quite a mouthful now. So maybe you, would you like to respond?
Yeah. Let me start with the last one, then I'll come to yours. Yeah, when I say not trained, look back in the 90s. My first initiative was in 1992. How many mediations were ongoing at that time? How many peace talks were there at that time? What I usually quote is the former Secretary of State of United States, Henry Kissinger, who then talked about mediation as he was saying, well, if they refuse, pull them by the balls, then their hearts and soul will follow. To him, it was, just do it. It was not the mediation we're talking about today. And you look back too, where was the UN as far as mediation was concerned at that time? African Union, even European Union. So mediation was down the line. It talked about, it was there, but it was not something that people went to school and started learning about it. I think teaching or learning mediation, a lot of people picked up interest in the 90s. And that is when a lot of people, students, non-students, talked about going to learn conflict resolution, mediation. I remember one of my courses in my master's was on persuasion, but it was to persuade in business, to persuade somebody to give in to A, B, C, D, E, but not in conflict. I still think it is very important to train people in mediation so that it's done in the proper manner. There are more researchers now. A lot more is known about it than it was in the past. And I consider it very, very important. But I also want to add that learning in classroom alone is not enough. Some personality is necessary. I participated in some peace talks where I was providing technical support, where the mediator walked in one day and said, you know, I'm giving you an hour. You either agree or we end the process. And the only common thing among the parties were negotiating was that they hated the mediator. Maybe that was a good thing because it got them to start talking. It got them to start talking and laughing and ridiculing this mediator, because they all agreed among themselves, we're not going to take him for another day. We don't want him. So he had this, what you call high power mediation authority. You do it. It has to be done within a certain time frame. Mediation, people have killed one another. You're not just going to say, let's agree on this is all right, that's done. So it takes also some interpersonal skill. I talked about being a good listener. The other thing is you must appear to be accessible to the people you're mediating. That if you're up there and you cannot listen, you know, that rapport that you build with them behind the scene is very, very important. And probably that is what may bring you to a breakthrough. You know, people come to, when negotiators are picked by their respective parties, sometimes they're picked because they're hardliners. Sometimes they're picked because they're knowledgeable about certain issues. Sometimes they're picked because they're articulate, but not necessarily because they're negotiators. So I'm saying this because I've seen some negotiations where you come to thematic issues, power sharing, constitution. Somebody is on the other side is saying, no. It's not because it's bad for him or her, but because they don't understand it. So training is very critical so that they do understand issues on gender. What is sexual violence? Some people believe it's just rape, but it's more than that. So you have to get the negotiators also to understand what these issues are, so that when they negotiate, it's from point of knowledge. It's not because our government or our constituency instructed us to toe this line. Understanding of the mediator needs to know. Now I know more than I did back then. Back then when it reflect, ceasefire. But what was ceasefire? Ceasefire was just the guns must be silent. The army go into your barracks, the rebels assemble at a designated place, have some people monitor them, make sure that there's some supply of certain things and that their weapons are being protected somewhere, that they do not have access to them anyhow. But now, when you get ceasefire, when the talks are going on, the arrangements are more elaborate than just basic guns falling silent. So training is crucial in the process and must continue, because the dynamics of wars are also changing from time to time. There are peculiarities from one country to another, or from one group, warring faction to another. So we need a good understanding of all these dynamics to be able to mediate. Without understanding the dynamics, the nature of the war, and what you really need to address, and what is crucial to both parties, you can blunder and not be able to reach the root cause of the problem and appease coming to a yes by both sides. Now, you asked also about being called mother. Somebody could probably think that maybe I had softened my position, and that's why they started calling me mother. In my own interpretation, you know, this is a group that the first time and the subsequent meetings I had with them, when you're going in there, you don't know whether you're going to come out alive. You don't know whether they're not going to hold you hostage and therefore molest you until they kill you. So to me too, it was some kind of consolation, because my going in and taking in government troops, they were not supposed to be protected. They were all, whereas they wanted themselves to remain with their weapons. So, whereas they are also a group that killed their own mothers, because when they abducted these children, they were forced to go back and kill their own parents and siblings. But to me, that if you call me mother, then you're likely not to hurt me. You also have some trust, because there must be trust. The mediator must be trusted. Once the parties have doubts about the mediator, then you have a problem in there. So that trust is important. So to me, it was helpful that I could then also talk to them as a mother, and what a mother doesn't just say sweet things, a mother rebukes. A mother gives guidance on what is right and what is wrong. So it gave me that leverage of being able to exercise more than what a normal mediator would do. Is that I may not rebuke you in the room here, but I'll call you out and put you aside and tell you that this was what the language you used was wrong. The threat you issued was wrong, and if you do that, we're not going to make any headways. And they would, they might not necessarily apologize, but they would reflect on it and correct that kind of language. Yeah, then the question, why are you so far away? There's some seats here. Please join us, because I don't want to turn to you. Please. But I'm also going to ask you to repeat, so that, because it was a fairly long question, if you can just...
Yeah. So I guess my comment is that if the baseline of a country has a very high incidence of rape at the baseline, before war, without war, and then rape becomes a tool of war, and then within the initial process of ceasefire, rape is put on the table, or sexual violence, but rape is a more maybe concrete term, so I'll say rape. Rape is put on the table as one of the measuring factors of the ceasefire. One, how do you determine that the rape is not inherent part of the culture that is actually associated with the violence of the war, one, and two, if that part of the ceasefire is broken, how do you address that? Because if you don't address it, what it says is women are not important and rape doesn't matter, and it invalidates that entire idea. So how do you manage that?
Well, probably your question comes from what I said earlier on, that rape actually is quite common in Africa. Just as much as I would say incest is quite common. Probably it's not peculiar to Africa alone, in other places. But I also say that it is aggravated during war times. You see, women don't want to come out and talk about, even confess that they're raped. They feel guilty. It's like they invited it upon themselves. So while it's happening, there's not much talk about it. But let me give you an example of a Rwandese woman who was telling me her pains when she had to. This is a very rural woman in Rwanda. She had been raped, and she'd never been on any plane. So they pick her up to fly her to Arusha, where the Rwanda tribunal was going on. And they brought her to court. And you know how intimidating these judges can be, or defense lawyer is strolling back and forth. So you said you were raped. Can you demonstrate how you were raped? And to a rural woman, to even confess that she was raped is a taboo. And here she's being told to demonstrate with all these people around, with all those judges wearing their wigs, that she was raped. And to make it worse for her, she had eye contact with the very man on the dock. She said, I wish, the best thing for me was, for them to do to me was to just kill me there and then, and not even talk about it. So, that is just to demonstrate how painful it can be. So, more and more, we are becoming open. It's not like 20 years ago that you didn't even talk about it. It was hardly ever mentioned. But now our laws are talking about rape, punishable, severe punishments as well. Although again, if you take it to the courts, how can you prove that so and so? You take the child, it's the semen. How do you prove that it was not consensual? So we have this. So when it becomes weapon of rape, I think there's more awareness now about it. The culprits are also being brought to book. I was very happy about the case of Congo, that you now have proven cases and where warlords have been imprisoned, convicted as a result of war. And as long as this keeps happening, it's going to encourage, it's going to act as a deterrent, whether in war or in normal times. What we need to do more is to work with our governments so that more and more culprits are brought to book and punished, and publicized, the punishments are publicized so that people are more aware about it, that they know if they do it, the subsequent of doing so is being in prison, so that it will help.
More questions? Yes, there's one here.
Three.
So my name is Laura Mitchell, and I work for the Norwegian Peacebuilding Resource Center, and
you
also.
speak
Oh yeah,
a little bit?
sorry.
Yes.
So I had a question, and when you were speaking about the arguments against bringing women to the peace table and them being emotional, I was thinking that it's, in some way, what you were saying, it also sounded like some of the women that were present were in a way bringing in voice that was not present on either of the kind of negotiating bodies, probably on the neither on the government side from the northern Uganda and neither from the combatants or the LRA. So I wondered if in a way that was also about actually recognizing whose voices are not present. And I was also thinking it was so interesting when you were talking about, in a way, I think of it as almost building up constituencies for peace in the conflict-affected area. And you talked about meeting with women and talking with women and women demonstrating that in many conflict-affected areas, there are a lot of constituencies there that are against the conflict, but they're not always coming together. So I don't know if, I was just thinking of it maybe from a slightly different angle, and I wondered what you, if how you see that.
Should we take a few more questions?
Yes. It depends how much time.
We have until 11:30, but we don't have to go on that long. Depends on how you feel.
Who's first?
Yes, you first.
John Ryan from Forum for Women and Development. I might sound angry when I raise my voice, but I'm not angry at all. You started off by saying that you were almost volunteering or a self-appointed peace negotiator. Nobody appointed you in the first place. And then when you went out, you talked to the women, at least after a while. My question is, this peace, women, peace and security agenda, is that sometimes a bit black and white, that either you're a woman and a victim of war, or you're a participator in a peace process. But how do you talk to these women? Can you say a little bit more about that? And how do you reach out to the...
Which women?
That's my question. When you say that you bring the voices of the women to the table, how can you be so sure that you reach women, and how do you bring the voices of the women to the negotiating table?
Was one question in the back?
Yeah, Magdalene from Oslo University. What I want to ask is based on what she presented. What of a situation where there is this culture block where women are not allowed even to speak or come nearer where men are? Because I admire the fact that you were able to really have this breakthrough in trying to implement peace at that level. I'm dealing with women and peacemaker program where the grassroots women, they always tell me how it is really so hard for them to implement peace or try to bring it for the hearings of the society, especially where men are. So the strategies that you really used, because that got, maybe their self-esteem is too low, or is that they have not been trained or educated. So that's why I really want maybe some lights to be thrown in where you said you were able to reach out to this peace or ceasefire.
Would you like to speak?
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, thank you. I'm going to ask you to go to clarify a little bit of your question. Are you asking whether women really bring? No, I think that's the second question. Can you?
I was thinking when you were talking about the claims that some people have that women are very emotional, and so this is a reason not to bring them to the table. And but then you were saying that this emotion, and I was thinking maybe also connection, can actually be very important because those women were able to speak to both parties. But I was wondering if also what they were able to bring was a kind of a voice or perspective that was not in the room. So it becomes emotion, but it's actually maybe actual missing voices or missing perspectives on the conflict. I wondered if it was another way to think about what you experienced, what you saw, or what you've seen.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That I think what I mentioned in here is that when you bring in women, they're talking about other social issues. When you leave it alone to the uniformed people or just men, it is power sharing. It's about the kind of jobs you're going to give me. It's the kind of houses you're going to give me. How am I going to live after, we've signed peace agreement? How many of my boys are going to be integrated into the National Army? How many of my senior commanders are going to be given promotion, or they will retain their status that were given in the bush? How many fleet of vehicles are you going to give us? We want this, we want this, we want that, we want that. But, and I've seen this happen, you have women who will stand up for education. After all these years of war, our children lost opportunity to go to school. We want schools included. We want economic activities. The reintegration, resettlement package we're looking for, it's not just job to 1, 2, 3, 10 people. It is about how can we support the community to pick up the pieces of their own lives out of, a war situation. So women bring all this, they will talk about, you could, the war will end, we'll be repatriated back, but there are no hospitals, no water sources, safe water sources, no roads. How are we going to start? They would want that included in the package of the agreement. I hope you see the difference, what women bring to the table. Because she's thinking of the sick children she left behind. She's thinking of opportunity lost as a result of not going to school. And they would want to talk about that as opposed to jobs. What is there for the community that will be packaged in the agreement rather than just jobs for 100 people, integrating the militias into fighting forces of the government. So, and that is what makes a peace agreement concrete. Concrete that is brought in all other dimensions of human lives when a settlement is reached. Because if you just talk about jobs, I've also seen actually in Uganda other peace agreements where the top echelon got positions, whatever they wanted, and then left out their fighters, who then regrouped to go back and fight because they were left out of the agreement. They were not, the package did not include proper demobilization or reintegration into the National Army. So a peace agreement can fail because some of the underlying causes that might be overlooked by the warlords or even governments that can take the country back to war. Yes. So my question, in a way, answers the question of yes. Let me clarify about being self-appointed. There were two initiatives as far as the Uganda peace talks were concerned. One was in 1992 when I was part of government. And then I can go on and on how peace talks can collapse and war resumes. In the case of Uganda, President Museveni was misinformed, confused. The war had become, some of the generals were profiteering from the war. There were creation of ghost soldiers. So they didn't want the war to end. Just like I talked about, I didn't, external factors that sometimes keep the war going, sometimes even interfere with peace talks. Suppliers of weapons will never want the war to end. So in the case of Ugandan case, that the government troops created ghost soldiers. You have a battalion in the Ugandan sense should have 736 fighters. In this case, the commander has only 200 fighters, the strength which could not even engage the rebels. So the salaries and supplies of the ghosts would go into his own pocket. So he's there, but he's building huge mansions, benefiting from the war. So that initiative of 1991 did not succeed. Spoilers came in and it failed. Then 2004, I would say 2003, I was in Washington with the World Bank, and then rebels carried out a massacre. And I just said, this cannot continue. So at that time, I did not exactly appoint myself. I went to meet President Museveni, and I said, you have to stop this war. You cannot continue to say, we'll end it militarily. You promised people in 3 months it will be finished. What if your children were there? What about your parents in those squalid camps? And you're promising 3 months. 3 months comes, more children are being abducted. Even when you follow them to try to rescue them, but you send helicopters that bombs. These bombs are not indiscriminate. They're not going to select. How would you feel as a parent? Economically, you've done well for the country, but 1/3 of your population are in camps. What if they were productive? So by persuasion, he agreed that to go back to the table. Then the next thing was to reach out the rebels. Now, at that time, I even suggested names that could be mediator, that I didn't have to be the person. Then both sides came back and said, well, you initiated this, and you've done it before, and we don't have any complaints yet that you did something that frustrated the process or jeopardized the process. So remain as the mediator. So at that time, I had the mandate of both parties, and again at that time too, I was a better mediator. I was doing it in a more structured manner. Not only that, the first time I thought it was a Ugandan thing, but this time around I involved international community. I always urge that, if you bring in international community, it brings credibility to the process, neutrality too, because the parties do realize that your interest is just to end the conflict, that you don't have any economic benefit interest. So I brought them as my allies, and it was very helpful indeed. And Norway was one of the countries that supported the process, that they acted, the team acted as a pressure group to both parties. If we reached a stalemate, for example, one of the ceasefire agreements ended, and government troops just went straight to attack the rebels in a designated place. And of course the rebels sent me this message: you lured us, you brought us here, now we're being attacked. And so by the time I stopped the process, we called ourselves Coalition of the Willing, or the Troika. And they were immediately ready to go and see the president to stop the attack on the rebels. So I had allies that I worked with that helped. They were both observers, they brought credibility. UN was also involved. They brought credibility to the process, impartiality, and more importantly, neutrality. That more important, the trust that the other parties, the negotiation teams had. So, women's voice to the table. Yes, inclusion of women who could really talk. You know, there were women observers, but both sides also had women representatives. And I tried very much. I talked about training. I also organized training for the negotiators so that they would know the issues, so that they would know how to negotiate. Not everybody knows how to negotiate. And emphasis, you're right, that very much I wanted women to understand, because I know now, and I knew then, that women talk from their hearts, and that's very important to bring to the table. It's not just what they've learned or what they think is important, but the way they appeal to the mediation team is always important. Yes, unfortunately, the cultural practices are still very much there, where sometimes, you know, what are you doing here? You're not even supposed to be part of this. And I think I told you at the beginning, the mixed reactions, and all of them were very hostile when I went to live in northern Uganda. But a lot of times, some of the mistakes we make is, if I look around here, how many men do we have? Unless we work with men and convince them that women's participation is important. Because when you have seminars like this, workshops like this, messages are sent to women. I've gone to important meetings in New York, and it's women. But if we do not have that partnership with men, the men will totally believe in the participation of women. And it is those men that we need to build strong partnership with, so that they can help us to support the process. So if you confine yourself just talking to women alone and not involving men to see the benefits of, you know, sometimes I would use cultural proverbs, bring in these men and say, for example, in northern Uganda, you had, at that time, you know, humanitarian assistance would come, Red Cross would come with their blankets, and World Food Program would come with their trucks of food. And who were there to receive these supplies? It's men. Women were shoved off the lines. Until I said, culturally, well, the war has displaced people. We don't have granaries anymore. These are our granaries. This World Food, what World Food Program brings here, it's now our granary. I've never seen in my life men going to a granary to pick up food. That's what you're doing now. It should be your wives. It should be your mothers, and not you men. And they laughed and said, yeah, you're right. You're actually right. So try to bring in some cultural practices that they make it happen, and do realize that the role of women in this exercise is important. we still have that uphill task, especially at rural settings. But to me, building partnership with men who understand, who appreciate, makes a difference in getting them to accept the role that women play in conflict resolution.
Are there any more questions? Yes, this one there.
My name is Eva and I come from Care. I just wanted to ask you a question regarding the UN security resolutions that have been developed during the past 2 decades.
UN?
Security resolutions on women, peace and security issues such as 1325, 1820 and so on. And you're saying that peace mediation processes have become more professional, training more apparent, and I see this as a part of that process. And my question is how useful have you, as a mediator, how useful do you see these tools in peace mediation?
I have a question related to that, because I think that a lot of the theory that has inspired those who do the training has been developed in Europe and in Northern America, and within more business-related issues and negotiations between governments and unions when there are labor conflicts, you know. To what extent do you think that these are relevant for the kinds of conflicts that we are talking about? International conflicts. War.
Right. I think there are lots of trainings now that are tailored to its conflict resolution. You know, I'm a strong believer in the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, but how much, the catch is, how much of that is being implemented? You still have, you go around and you'll still find they will say there are no women mediators. Universities, institutions are churning out many women mediators. But we also need to talk about, are we talking about mediators just being on the mediation team or taking the lead? I think our issue right now is taking the lead, being more visible in the process, because we've trained. Now, according to the UN system, you must know the UN system to be a mediator. Well, perception is that mediation is political. It's just to be able to persuade people to agree. But there's art and skills in mediation. And this is now what is being taught. But I also say there's the other angle, that is not purely what you learn in classroom. What you learn in classroom is going to help you structure it in the proper way to make sure that all the issues are taken into account. But there's also the personality and the team that you have with you as a mediator. So I think to a large extent, peacekeepers, there are quite a number of women now that are heading peacekeeping in a number of countries. But even then, how often are they appointed as chief mediators? Because the Secretary General will still post somebody. They will send Mr. Obasanjo because he was head of state of Nigeria, who will talk like a head of state, but not that I'm not criticizing him, but you have some mediators come in and, you know, the way they handle the negotiation teams, sometimes it's not proper. But these appointments are based on the status they've held. So, and then you who are trained will be there to provide technical support And you are not in a position, sometimes because somebody is a boss, to advise in the right, to advise that it's not just the way we structure this mediation, but also the way you communicate. Communication is another very important skill in the process that can get the parties to respect you and listen to you and trust you that you're doing the right thing. And believe me, I'm a strong believer that women make a difference by the way they communicate to the factions, the ability, the patience to be able to listen. Because sometimes you might not even go to bed until 3 in the morning because the factions have their concerns. You say this in the meeting room. Is that still your position? You don't understand us, or you need to know more. And sometimes they start with their background to this, and they all want to talk. They're saying exactly the same thing, but you cannot afford to tell somebody that I've already heard it from Christian. He must still talk, and you must still hear. It's the same thing being played and played again. So, and not many people are gifted with that patience. You don't learn that in a classroom. You have to have it. Or if you don't learn it in a classroom, the actual exercise will train you to do it. Or otherwise, you miss out on mediation. Yes.
Are there any more burning issues or questions that you would like to raise? I think we have 2 more then. This one first then.
I'm Chi, I'm here at Crew. We know most of the people involved in negotiation are not actually the guys who are actually driving the conflict. So how do you translate, especially with respect to the issue you talk about emotion, using emotion pairs to bring them to their senses, how do you transfer this from the mediators to the key people that most often they are thousands of miles away, you don't even know them? Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Phyllis. I work with Plan Norway. You mentioned about women bringing in social concerns at the mediating table, whereas maybe men are usually most concerned about power sharing. I was just wondering, to what extent is the aspect of justice brought into the negotiating or the mediation process, and does it have a gender perspective?
You're right that the people which usually come to negotiate are not necessarily the drivers of the war. Yes and no. Yes, I talked about these external forces that may not be on the front line, but they have a lot of influence on what is going on. I talked about suppliers. Warlords usually have their constituencies. Maybe elders somewhere, diaspora are also can be called upon. And sometimes selection is done, and I said this earlier, on the basis that somebody is a hardliner. Somebody is a good debater, knows how to talk. Somebody is, respected and therefore can go and represent us. Now, that is because that party has the trust and confidence that the person may not be on the front line, but can effectively represent them because the person maybe believes in the cause of the war. The person maybe has been helping with some logistics. But I dare say also, mediation has become such a lucrative business that everybody wants to be involved. You'll find civil society organizations. While I strongly believe inclusivity is very important, but you also have spoilers who will always proliferate any peace talks. So these guys, while they might not be the people carrying weapons, but they have the respect and confidence of their faction to be able to represent them effectively. You also find a lot of, I mean, as a mediator, you must determine the number of people who will come to the table. Forgive me for going back and forth about South Sudan. When the peace talks first started in January, government sent 29 negotiators. Rebels only had 9. And of course, they had money. They were staying in hotels. They would go have beer alongside that, have drinks, laugh, talk to people. And the rebels had no money. They'd run away from the country with some level of asymmetry in there. That you want to say that, okay, you might not have money for the best hotels, you might not be able to afford to go into that restaurant, but when it comes to the actual issues that brought us here, you matter, you're important. And also the number, you go back and say, no, we are, so the chief mediator came back and said, we're allowing only 5 on both sides. And then they made a lot of noise about, how do you send us back? We all matter. But what will 29 people tell you that 10 cannot handle? So it's a show of power. You know, they walk in and the room is crowded with one side, and the other side is not crowded. So how the criteria for selection of people who should represent the parties is usually purely up to them. You, as a mediator, you don't interfere. As a mediator, you deal with those that have been sent to the room and not question if you've heard that Clement is a thief. Why did you can't go and say, why do you include a thief on your team? It's up to them to decide on who should represent them. Yes, justice, and very much so. That, you know, let me start with the ceasefire agreement, which is a foundation, which actually, if you have a good ceasefire agreement, will take into consideration all these aspects. Because eventually what comes onto the table, on the agenda, are all these issues that have to be agreed upon. And therefore the perspective of gender, especially talk about sexual violence. What kind of justice? Because the aggrieved people, to have sustainable peace, to have peace of mind, you may not bring life back, but recognition. Reparations that we usually don't talk about. You know, we go in for, after peace agreement has been reached, reintegration, rehabilitation, but what about the victims? Victims are oftentimes totally ignored. In fact, let me give you an example of my own experience. You know, NGOs went and it was development partners, everybody is rehabilitation, reintegration, economic activities for ex-combatants. even the amnesty government came up with gave package to the ex-combatants, which is very good. I'm not against it. But you had victims come to me and say, you know, we're seeing the very people who are responsible for killing us, raping us, destroying our properties. We're destitute. We see them come with packages. It's cash, it's household items. So you're only interested in rewarding those who killed us. A woman comes to me and says, you know, nobody is paying tuition for my children. Is it because they did not kill? That's why nobody would pay their tuition. Because I've seen these ex-combatants, tuition is being paid for them and their children, but we're being left out. So who is the voice of the victims? So justice can only be done, although in the case, you know, one of my challenges I had in mediation was I was negotiating with the team that I had been indicted by the ICC, International Criminal Court. It was a big challenge because you leave the actual mediation, you are also mediating with these other parties. But I'm bringing this in because the question of justice, I was consoling some justice. I said, you know, amnesty cannot allow us, you can go to court as an individual. It's just that government cannot prosecute these people, but as an individual, you're free to go to court. But the task, one thing is, can you afford the court as a victim? Can somebody support victims to take some of these culprits to court? Two, the proof, to be able to prove in times of war that it is you who actually killed would be very difficult. So, so while the amnesty does not stop you doing that, but at the same time, I want you to realize the challenges you will meet that you can't afford because you will need a lawyer, the proof that it was done, that it was so and so who did it. But in my opinion, even with you know, amnesty, blanket amnesty, sometimes reparations is one of the ways and means of appeasing victims. It's recognition that yes, we know you lost somebody or you lost people. We know you lost properties. We know you suffered, that you're now destitute. So it helps. And then it helps one, that recognition that they feel so-and-so might not have been taken to court, but there's that recognition. It's like being remorse, accepting responsibility, giving you something so that you can pick up the pieces of your life and start again. And that should be part of the justice we're talking about, because in the case, again, northern Uganda, you have boys abducted when they're 7, 8, 10, 11 years old, forced to go back and kill. They were victims when they were abducted. Then they became perpetrators of violence when they were in the bush. How do you ensure that justice is done with somebody like that, who are, at first they're forced, although later, once they start, then they tell you, you know, it's the only way to get recognition. It's to kill in the most brutal manner. It's the only way to be rewarded. So then they would do it. That conscience, that innocence is lost at that point in time. So very much so. But like I said, it's important that it's included right at the beginning as part of justice, what would be done to victims, and bringing in the gender dimension. Yes.
think on that note that we will end this seminar now. We are so glad that you could come, that you accepted our invitation, and that you have been here to share your wealth of experience with us. This has been very interesting and has given us a lot of food for thought. Thought for food, I was about to say. So thank you so much, Betty Bigombe.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, and I wish you safe travels back home.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very much.